You know that old saying, if these walls could talk? We use it when we're standing in an old house, imagining the rich history, the mundane family arguments, and the quiet moments of joy that seeped into the wallpaper over the decades. It's a comforting thought. It makes us feel connected to the past. But let me ask you something. What if the walls didn't talk? What if, instead, they listened? What if they breathed and chewed and waited in the dark? What I am about to tell you is a truth I have never spoken out loud. If you're listening to this, I need you to understand that monsters don't live under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes, they are built directly into the foundation of everything you thought was safe. And sometimes, those monsters share your blood. My name is Elias. Up until about 8 months ago, my life was perfectly normal, boring even. I was a 32-year-old financial analyst living in a sterile, modern apartment in downtown Chicago. I liked the concrete. I liked the glass. I liked that there were no dark corners. But then, my father passed away. It was sudden. A massive stroke while reading the Sunday paper. He was dead before his coffee even got cold. My father, Arthur, was a prominent architect. He was a strict, cold, meticulous man who demanded absolute perfection in every aspect of his life. His suits were tailored, his lawn was manicured with a ruler, and his reputation in our affluent upstate New York community was flawless. He had designed our family home himself, a sprawling, imposing, modern, Gothic hybrid sitting on 30 acres of dense, isolated forest. It was a beautiful house, but it was never a warm one. With his sudden death, my mother, Margaret, was left completely alone in that massive labyrinth. Mom had been slowly slipping into the unpredictable abyss of early onset dementia for the past 3 years. My dad had kept it hidden, managing her care himself to avoid any embarrassing gossip. But with him gone, I had no choice. I packed up my life, broke my lease, and moved back to the sprawling estate in the woods to become her full-time caretaker. The first few weeks were a blur of estate lawyers and trying to establish a routine with a woman whose mind was a fractured mirror. The house felt entirely different without my father's oppressive presence. It felt overwhelmingly empty. The ceilings were too high, the hallways were too long, and the silence at night was deafening. But soon, that silence broke. It started with small, dismissible things. A missing slice of pizza from a box I left on the kitchen island. A crumpled Snickers wrapper stuffed behind a baseboard. Strange, considering my dad was a health fanatic who never allowed candy in the house, and I hadn't bought any. Then, while fixing a leaky pipe under the guest bathroom sink, I found a small pile of chicken bones pushed deep into the back corner of the cabinet. They were picked completely clean, gnawed to the marrow. Rats, I thought. We lived in the woods. But a cold, sinking feeling hit me in the pit of my stomach. Rats don't carefully fold candy wrappers. Rats don't neatly stack stripped chicken bones in the dark. I found my mother sitting in the sunroom, staring blankly out at the tree line. "Mom," I asked gently, "have you been wandering around the house at night, eating snacks?" She slowly turned her head. A sweet, vacant smile spread across her lips. "Oh, no, Elias," she whispered. "I don't go into the dark. That's where he is. He gets so hungry, you know. Your father always made sure he was fed. Have you been feeding him, Elias?" My blood ran cold. "Feeding who, Mom? Dad's gone. It's just you and me." Her smile dropped. Her eyes snapped to mine with a sudden, terrifying clarity. "Your father is gone," she hissed, leaning in so close I could smell her stale tea. "But the hungry boy in the walls is not. He's crying, Elias. He misses his father." She slumped back, the clarity vanishing as quickly as it came, and began humming a 1950s tune. Dementia, I told myself, she's hallucinating. But that night, around 2:00 a.m., the house was dead silent. And then I heard it. It wasn't up in the attic. It wasn't down in the basement. The sound was coming from inside the wall directly next to my bed. It was heavy, deliberate, like someone dragging jagged fingernails slowly across the backside of the drywall. The scratching moved linearly from the floorboards toward the ceiling. Then, a soft, heavy thud. A body shifting its weight in a tight space. I lay there paralyzed until sunrise. I didn't call an exterminator. Driven by a potent mix of terror and an obsessive need for the truth, I marched down to my father's locked study. I busted the door open with a crowbar, tore through his filing cabinets, and finally found the holy grail of his secrets, the original, hand-drawn blueprints of the house. I unrolled the massive sheets of vellum on his oak desk. I'm no architect, but I grabbed a tape measure and walked the house, comparing reality to the paper. The first floor was a perfect match. Kitchen, dining room, study, exact. But upstairs, that's where the nightmare solidified. I stood in the hallway separating my bedroom from the guest room. I measured the physical distance, 12 feet. But I looked down at the brittle, yellowed blueprints. On paper, that gap was only 6 feet. There was a 6-foot, wide void running straight through the center of the second floor, a massive blind spot wrapped in drywall, entirely unaccounted for, hidden in plain sight. My mind raced. Where do you access a vertical void that runs through a house? You start from the bottom. I sprinted to the basement. It didn't take long to find. It was practically waiting for me. Tucked behind the rumbling HVAC unit and obscured by a wall of empty cardboard boxes, there was a heavy plywood panel. It was painted cinder block, gray to blend in with the foundation. Secured to the outside was an industrial steel latch, and resting in the latch, unhooked, was a heavy brass padlock. Someone had been coming and going. In the thick dust on the concrete floor below, I saw the smeared impressions of bare feet. Large, misshapen bare feet. If I had a shred of self-preservation, I would have run out the front door and never looked back. But the adrenaline pushed me forward. I grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker, clicked on my flashlight, pulled the latch, and swung the panel open. The smell hit me like a physical blow. A thick, suffocating wall of copper, rotting food, unwashed skin, and ancient, trapped dust. It smelled like an animal's den. Tying my shirt over my nose, I stepped inside. This wasn't just a crawl space, it was a fully realized hidden corridor. The floor was rough plywood, the walls pink, fibrous insulation. It was terrifyingly narrow, forcing me to turn my shoulders to walk. As I followed the incline snaking upwards between the floors, the sheer horror of this place closed in on me. The walls were lined with makeshift shelves holding empty bean cans and hoarded water bottles. Piles of dried excrement filled the corners. But the most gut-wrenching details were the objects embedded in the walls. Rusted toy cars, wooden alphabet blocks, a filthy, decaying teddy bear pinned to the drywall with a massive nail. These weren't an intruder's things, they were a child's. I passed slatted air vents. Through them, I could look out and see my own living room, my own kitchen. Whoever lived in this dark artery of the house had been watching us, watching me eat, watching me sleep. Finally, I reached the end of the incline, pulling myself up into a slightly wider chamber between the upstairs bedrooms. The source of the scratching, my flashlight beam cut through the pitch black and settled on the far corner. There was a nest, a massive pile of shredded blankets, stolen laundry, and my father's old coats. And in the center of the nest, shivering violently, was a man. I froze, the iron poker raised above my head. The man threw his spindly, horrifyingly long arms up to shield his face from the blinding light. His joints were swollen and knobby from a lifetime of crouching. His skin was translucent, heavily scared, and caked in dirt. "Don't," a voice croaked. It was a wet, raspy gurgle, like vocal cords that hadn't practiced human speech in decades. "Please, don't hit, Papa." Papa said no hitting. I slowly lowered the poker, my hands trembling. I shifted the flashlight beam to illuminate his face without blinding him. The flashlight slipped from my grip and clattered onto the plywood floor. The man's face was severely deformed. His jaw jutted at a sickening angle, a severe cleft palate leaving his teeth exposed in a permanent snarl. One eye sat lower than the other. He looked like a creature from a horror film, but as the ambient light caught his terrified, mismatched eyes, my breath caught in my throat. I knew those eyes. I saw them every morning in the mirror. I saw them in the portraits of my father downstairs. They were piercing, pale blue, and undeniably familiar. "Who are you?" I whispered. The creature lowered his arms, tilting his head like a curious dog. Whimpering, he reached into the folds of his filthy nest, pulled out a yellowed Polaroid, and held it out with trembling fingers. It was decades old. It showed my young, beautiful mother holding a baby. My father stood next to her, looking down at the child with a cold, disgusted grimace. The baby's face was distorted, misshapen even then. On the white border, written in my father's blocky architectural handwriting, were the words Noah, 1974. A failure, 1974, 10 years before I was born. My reality shattered. My parents had a child before me. A child born with severe deformities. My father, a man whose entire existence was predicated on flawless perfection, who couldn't stomach the whispers at the country club or the pitying looks from colleagues, couldn't accept a flawed son. So, he faked a tragedy, a stillbirth, a crib death, whatever lie he spun, and he used his brilliant architectural mind to build a prison. He took his firstborn son and sealed him inside the walls. For 50 years, my brother Noah had lived in the dark. He crawled through the dust, eating scraps my father brought him in the dead of night, peeking through heating grates to watch a family he was never allowed to join. He watched me open Christmas presents and run in the sunlight, all while sitting in the suffocating darkness, terrified of the man who was both his god and his jailer. "Papa is gone," Noah gurgled, rocking back and forth, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on his cheeks. Papa asleep. Noah hungry, so hungry. I stood there, staring at the broken man who shared my DNA. A tidal wave of pure hatred for my dead father crashed over me, followed by a sickening realization of my mother's quiet complicity, and finally, a crushing, profound sorrow for the feral ghost cowering before me. I could have called the police. I could have brought the squad cars, broken down the walls, and exposed the horrific truth to the world. But then what? He was a 50-year-old man with the mind of a terrified toddler. He was unsocialized, blind to the sun. The world outside wouldn't save him. It would destroy him. The news vans would camp on our lawn. He would be prodded by doctors, stared at by strangers, and eventually locked away in a sterile psychiatric ward, heavily medicated and strapped to a bed. Society wouldn't free him. They would just move him to a brighter cage. This dark, stinking labyrinth was the only world he knew. And I was the only family he had left. I slowly knelt down in the dirt. I picked up the flashlight and turned it off, letting the comforting darkness wrap around us once again. "I know, Noah," I whispered into the blackness. "I know you're hungry." I backed out of the nest, descended into the basement, slipped out from behind the heavy plywood panel, and closed it shut. I picked up the heavy brass padlock, stared at it for a long time, and then placed it on a shelf. I left the latch unlocked. It has been 6 months since that day. My mother's dementia has worsened. She rarely speaks anymore. Just sits in her chair smiling at the wallpaper. I haven't told a soul. I haven't called the authorities. I just continue to live my life in this echoing house, but I don't feel alone anymore. Now, every night at exactly 900 p.m., I go into the large, modern kitchen. I make an extra plate of dinner. Roast beef, extra mashed potatoes, thick slices of bread, a large slice of cherry pie. I carry the plate upstairs to the second-floor hallway. I stop in front of the ornate brass heating grate near the baseboard. I take a screwdriver from my pocket, carefully remove the metal grate, and slide the warm plate into the dark, silent void. I sit cross-legged on the hardwood floor and wait. Within seconds, I hear it. Skitter, skitter. Then, from out of the pitch black abyss, a long, pale, scarred hand slowly reaches out. The trembling fingers wrap around the edge of the plate and pull it back into the darkness. "Thank you," a raspy, unused voice whispers from deep inside the walls. "You're welcome, brother," I reply quietly. I screw the grate back into place. I stand up, turn off the hallway light, and walk into my father's old study. I sit down in his heavy leather armchair. I pour myself a glass of his expensive scotch, and as I listen to the soft, rhythmic sounds of chewing echoing through the plaster and drywall, a chilling realization settles over me like a heavy winter coat. I didn't free him. I didn't save him. I just took over the shift. My father built the cage, yes. But as I sit here in the dark, guarding the horrific secret of our family, I realize the most terrifying truth of all. I am my father's son.